Welcome to the Happiness Podcast. I'm Dr. Robert Puff. The dark side. Why would anyone ever turn to the dark side? What I mean by that, why do we turn to other people and hurt them sometimes in such horrific ways? Why would any human being choose to go to the dark side? As you probably can imagine, I've heard a lot of dark stories in the course of my career as a clinical psychologist. And sometimes it really does take my breath away what one human being can do to another. But you don't have to do what I do in order to see the dark side out in our world. We can see it, we can read about it, we can experience it throughout our lives. The media has gotten very good at displaying to us how dark human beings can get. And if we live long enough, we're probably going to see personal examples of it, people that we know that turn to the dark side. In my own case, I remember once many years ago knowing a couple that I had spent time with. They'd even been to my house. I knew them fairly well. I knew he had a lot of psychological issues, but presumably he was working on them and was getting better. As relationships do, we fell out of touch and I hadn't heard from them for several years. And then someone reached out to me that also knew them and said, "Did you hear what happened?" And I said, "No." And the act that occurred was so horrific that it made front page news. They had had a couple children who were in their early teens and they were going through a very terrible divorce. Well, one day when he had his kids, he came home and he shot both his children and then took the gun and committed suicide. Clearly, he really wanted to hurt his ex-wife, and he did. That's about as dark as it can get. It can get dark in life, but that was one of the darkest examples that I've ever seen. If you were able to listen to my talk last week, it was entitled "Don't Give Up, How to Stay Kind," and it was about when people have tragedies that happen to them, ones that cause them incredible emotional pain and suffering. What do they do with that pain? In some situations, they become tough. They learn to stand up for themselves and no one's going to mess with them. But it can come with a lot of anger and a lot of aggression. The second thing I said is they may turn towards addictions as a way of numbing that horrific pain that's inside of them. And then I gave steps to overcome it in healthy ways. But what I didn't talk about was when someone has pain and they become tough and they numb themselves, that can lead to really horrific choices, particularly if the numbing is substances like alcohol or drugs. And again, I do want to repeat, just because someone has pain in their lives, they've learned to stand up for themselves and they turn to substances to numb the pain, it does not mean that they're necessarily going to hurt others with their pain. But what happens is when we take substances, we lose what's called impulse control. Things that we would never do, we do. You probably heard the term liquid courage. That's where things that you might never do, you do because you feel brave. Well, in the same sense, when you're on a substance and you have a lot of repressed anger or you're an aggressive person in general, if you drink, you can really amp up that aggression. And that's where the horrific things that we read about in the papers or that we know through our own personal experiences occur. One of the ways we can go darkest in life is by hurting an innocent child or even an animal. We can sexually abuse them, we can physically or emotionally abuse them. But if you've gone through an experience like that or know someone who has, you will often find that the abuser had alcohol in their breath or was using a substance. They normally wouldn't have done that, but when they drank, they lost impulse control. Again, something they would never do, they do. It doesn't excuse their behavior in any way. They're still held culpable for what they did. But it does take away their normal response that I would never do that. That goes away. Often what it does, it feeds their own abuse. They have so much self-hatred. Sometimes for what happened to them, they blame themselves. And because they blame themselves, when they drink or they use a substance, they've thought so many horrific things about themselves. What do people that are horrible do? They do horrible things. So on that substance, they cross a line that normally they would never cross. And then they leave so much damage in the wake of their abuse. And now they also hate themselves for what they've done because they crossed a line. They went to the dark side, and their self-loathing is exponential. And what they were so afraid of doing, so afraid of becoming, they've now become. And trust me, I've worked with a lot of people who have gone to the dark side, and they truly do not look in the mirror and say, I love you. They hate themselves for what they do. And it causes so much damage emotionally to themselves and obviously to their victims. Well, I don't want this talk to be all negative. I want it to be positive. So let's talk about what can we do not to go to the dark side, because we don't have to. It really is a choice. But the choice is going to occur before we turn to our substance, our addiction. Once we start drinking, once we start using our substance, all bets are off. Now, even if we have pain in our past, it doesn't mean when we use a substance that we're going to turn toward the dark side. But it makes us more susceptible to it. So that's why we have to be careful. And the way we're careful is we say, okay, am I using this substance? Am I using this addiction as a way of suppressing pain in my past? What would be a better option? A better option might be getting involved with a 12-step program, going to therapy, getting a support group that we get involved with, reaching out to people that can help us, studying self-help things that are really helpful to help us heal from our past. And when we are turning towards a substance, we can say, okay, how's this day going? Am I in a good mood? Is everything well? Or I am in a stressful mood and things aren't going well? Because if we're stressed and we're wanting to turn towards, say, alcohol to relax, that is a bad combination. It is far better and much more safe to turn towards any types of substances when we're in a really good mood and everything's going fine. Then the chances of us acting out on our perhaps repressed emotions will be far less. It probably won't even occur. What catches us is when we turn towards substances when we're in a bad place and we want to feel better. That's where it can be very dangerous. So we have to be aware, and we have to realize, if I am addicted to a substance, can I get help for it so I stop using? Or if it is just something I turn towards to relax, and I don't feel maybe I'm an addict, but it is something I use to relax, can I use it to relax when I'm already relaxed, not when I'm having a bad day? Because if we're having a bad day and we use, that can easily turn us to the dark side. The second thing we have to do is saying, okay, I'm turning towards the dark side because dark things happen to me. People hurt me. So we have to do the work. We have to look at, well, what happened to me in my past? What am I choosing to not look at? Or what am I choosing to ignore and not think about? And it's time to start healing, to heal our hearts from the wounds of the past, so that instead of being wounds, they're just scars. We don't forget what happened, but we do heal it so it doesn't hurt us anymore. Because ignoring emotional wounds from the past is definitely not good for us. And sometimes, as I'm talking about today, it can be harmful for others. Of course, there are infinite amount of people that have had horrific things happen to them that never hurt another soul in their entire life. But I do think the possibility of us making poor choices where we do start going to the dark side happens when we're willing to use substances to numb that pain. We have to be very, very careful because it's not going to heal it. Our addiction, our substance may temporarily take away from the pain, but it will not fix the pain. We need to proactively choose to go after ways to heal it through therapy, through self-help courses, through learning and reaching out to support groups. There's so many different ways we can heal. And when we do that, when we proactively go after healing techniques, then we will get better. It takes time, it takes effort, but numbing the pain and ignoring the pain and becoming angry because of the pain can lead us to the dark side. And we just don't want to do that. And the way we do that is by avoiding the two things I talked about last week. One is becoming tough and learning to stay soft in our hearts. The second thing is trying to numb the pain, because the pain needs to be healed, not be numbed. Now, one thing I do want to conclude with, if we do choose to not go to the dark side by becoming tough and numbing our pain, is realizing that when people do turn towards the dark side and turn that energy towards us or towards people that we love, we don't necessarily have to hate them. We can understand what they did, and with that understanding, it doesn't excuse their behavior, but it may help us soften our hearts towards them and feel sorry for them, maybe pray for them, but not hate them. Understanding how people get to the way they're at, again, doesn't excuse their behavior, but it softens our hatred towards them. Their lives truly are miserable, and they don't need our hatred on top of that misery. We can set boundaries, protect our heart. We don't have to hate the people that are out there hurting others. We can understand them. Perhaps we can even help them. But hatred is also a subtle way of going to the dark side. It's far better to understand and be so thankful that we have tools in place that keep us from the dark side. And the wonderful thing about learning to be kinder, being softer towards others who have turned towards the dark side, is that if we do mess up, maybe for an instant, or even for a few days, or even for a little bit of time, we can say, okay, I get it. I get why I turned toward the dark side, and now I know the steps back and away from there. I can forgive myself and I can move on. When we forgive others, when we're kind towards others, if we do mess up, even for a moment, we're going to be so much softer on ourselves. And it really is all about being kind towards others, kind towards ourselves, not letting people hurt us, but not hurting them back when they do. Instead, set very healthy boundaries, take care of our hearts, and making sure that we're healing our hearts and being very careful with addictions, particularly substances that change our affect, like alcohol and drugs, because they can make us do things that we would never do. They can take away impulse control. And we need impulse control so that when someone is doing something, whether real or imagined, we don't lash out at people anymore. We reach out to them towards kindness and with understanding and seeking clarification, not anger or rage or the dark side. We can truly have beautiful lives, but this does take work. And if we do have things in our past that we haven't dealt with, we need to heal them. And we need to be careful not to be too tough. Try to keep our hearts soft. And remember, if we choose to have a glass of wine or a beer or whatever it may be, that we're in a good mood, all is well. And that's what we're choosing to do, instead of needing to make our day better through that substance. That's where, not necessarily, but potentially, the dark side can come from. And we're going to choose not to do that. Instead, we're going to choose to have beautiful, wonderful lives where we are kind towards others and loving towards ourselves. Thank you for joining me on the Happiness Podcast. If you'd like to learn more about the podcast, please go to happinesspodcast.org. And until next time, accept what is, love what is.